Hi Ivan, episode 5, and tonight we're going more towards the fringe.
How are you, Michael?
I'm not too bad. Although yesterday you said Percy Sledge was the most important thing in your day for you. For me, I think I've found something that's making me lose faith in humanity, which is basically the representatives from various footballing nations have described Sepp Blatter as like Jesus, like Nelson Mandela, and like Martin Luther King.
That's quite bizarre.
Yes, Sepp Blatter's not really. No. I wouldn't.
None of the above.
Yeah, I wouldn't describe FIFA as a paragon of virtue.
Let's not say too much unless somebody sues us.
But back to the election. When I said at the start we're going on to the fringes, today we're going to talk about UKIP. I think in the Scottish context, the first thing I'd like to say, see what you think about it, is that in their manifesto it's been noted that Scotland is only mentioned 7 times, and 6 of those are about taking money away from the Scottish budget. So that doesn't really encourage Scottish people to vote for them.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, UKIP, clearly a dysfunctional organisation. If you thought Jim Murphy had it bad with UK Labour, cutting the ground away from them, David Cobur's got it even worse with UK UKIP, if you want to call it that, completely hanging him out to dry. But he soldiers on bravely, making incoherent statements as he goes. But the reality is that UK is very, very much an English-centred party. And their attitude to the Scottish budget, and to the Scottish government, betrays that.
Lord Monckton, who was actually at one time the president of UKIP in Scotland, even said the Scots are subsidy junkies whinging like a trampled bagpipe as they wait for their next fix of English taxpayers' money. I mean, it's astonishing that they actually even have 0.5% of the vote in Scotland.
Well, let's see what they get in the general election. I think that they'll struggle to get much traction anywhere based on those kind of statements.
So, I mean, how do you feel when you see some of the more bizarre stuff coming out? I mean, we'll get to what they're taking seriously on, which is maybe immigration. EU is going to be another episode. But when you have members of the party coming out and saying carbon capture technology would starve all the poor little trees.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing's been built around the personality of Nigel Farage. That's what's driven them to where they are, and they've collected all kinds of oddball individuals along the way. Obviously, David Coburn we've talked about, and there's plenty more. It's not a coherent organisation, it's just a protest grouping on the far right.
So if that's the case, why do you think they do get so much play in the media? Like the BBC have Farage onto everything, Daily Mail, Telegraph, and other people. They tend to get more of a hearing than, say, the Green Party.
Well, it's quite bizarre, and sure they had a surge in popularity around about the Euro elections, but clearly, as you mentioned, Europe was one of their big issues, and that's traditionally what happens, and then they fall away again as we get close to a proper election, a general election, and they've got, I think, around about 12% of the vote now and falling week by week as we get closer to the vote. So you're right, the media bubble was really pushing them up at some points through the last year and early this year. That's less and less at the moment, but that's largely what sustained them. And it got to the stage where Nigel Farage was never off Question Time and other shows, which really didn't make any sense given their relevance to the UK political scene.
Like I said, EU is going to be a separate episode. So the other big thing that people tend to focus on with UKIP is immigration. Which is basically immigration bad, immigration bad, immigration bad. With the basic thing about immigration, do we need more or do we need less?
We need immigration, there's no doubt about it. And if you look at Scotland in the context of economic growth and population growth, which are very closely tied, Scotland's population at 5 million is the same as it was 100 years ago. Norway's population, for example, is more than doubled in that period, as has many other countries. The UK has grown by about 60 or 70% over that period. So Scotland has been held back. We're underutilising the resources and the land mass and the capability we've got because we've had such an exodus of people out of Scotland. I mean, they reckon that there's 8 million people living in the rest of the UK that trace their ancestry back to Scotland and migrated at various times over the last 2 or 3 centuries. If you go back, in fact, to the time of the Act of the Union in 1707, Scotland's population was about 22% of the whole of the UK at the time. It's now barely 8%. So that shows the extent to which Scotland's population share of the total island has shrunk over that time. And as I say, population growth is very critical for economic growth. You've got to have an influx of people coming in, never mind the fact we've got a demographic issue with more and more older people. We need more people of working age to fill that gap. So the reality is that more immigration from a purely economic point of view is very, very important. And a lot of the people that come here, if you look at some of the service sectors in Scotland, people that come here from abroad are quite critical in supporting a lot of those sectors. So on many, many levels, from an economic point of view, apart from anything else, immigration is important to the Scottish economy.
Going back to the referendum, there was a kind of sleight of hand used, because I believe Salmon said something along the lines of, we need a figure of 20-something thousand. And then that was reported as Salmon wants 20,000 more immigrants a year. But the actual figure was sort of 21, so he was only saying we need 1,500 more. But with the poisonous anti-immigrant rhetoric and a kind of misrepresentation of what he'd actually said, it was used to sort of beat the yes movement during the referendum as well.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of start from this position where they want to say everything about immigration is bad, and they're pumping out that message all the time. Somebody says maybe it isn't so bad, maybe it's actually quite a good thing, then they try and turn it against you. And they twisted the numbers as they often do. But those kind of numbers, frankly, Scotland needs that and more in terms of population growth to sustain economic growth over the coming years. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And that, of course, leaving the economics aside, I mean, the diversity that the various immigrant groups bring to Scotland is very important for the whole culture of Scotland as a country, that people have come here from all over the world and made Scotland their home. And it's also very important because it gives us links to other countries, and having people in Scotland from other parts of the world gives us a kind of bridge to those countries, and that's important from a cultural point of view. But frankly, going back to economics, it's also important from a business and an export point of view, because the more links we've got with other parts of the world, the better it frankly is for Scotland.
And the last wee thing, if we manage to get the people that we need to come in, wouldn't Ed Miliband build a wall?
Like the Emperor Hadrian. No, frankly, it's nonsense. The largest immigrant group into Scotland, of course, are people from the rest of the UK. And we need people from all over, including from the rest of the UK as well. And that's very important to the population growth and the diversity we have within Scotland.
Thanks, Ivan.
Thanks very much, Michael.